stay with us as we remain in the region, but move now to Iran, which has ruled out any new nuclear talks with the United States if they are conditioned on halting uranium enrichment. The statement came from Ali Velayati, a top advisor to Iran's supreme leader, amid renewed diplomatic efforts following last month's brief but intense conflict with Israel. Tehran insists it will not give up its right to peaceful nuclear activity. Previous US-Iran nuclear talks mediated by Oman broke down after 5 rounds when Israel launched a surprise strike on Iranian facilities in June, later backed by limited US military action. Since then, both sides have expressed interest in reviving talks, but no meeting between Iran's Abbas Araghchi and US envoy Steve Witkoff has been scheduled, that according to Iran's foreign ministry. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian reiterated Tehran's support for diplomacy, saying the country remains committed to peaceful negotiations. Despite Western accusations that Iran is pursuing nuclear weapons, Tehran continues to deny it, maintaining that its enrichment program, now reaching 60% purity, according to some experts, is solely for civilian purposes. The IAEA also states there's no clear sign of weaponization. Well, joining us once again, and thank you for staying with us, is Jordan Cope, of course, Middle East affairs experts. Jordan, this situation is obviously a difficult one following the 12-day war, following the tensions and rhetoric. Firstly, looking at this uranium enrichment, why is the West so keen on getting Iran to the table to discuss a nuclear deal at this moment?
The reasons are clear. It's simply to prevent a greater war from breaking out. The West obviously doesn't want to have to fight any wars that it does not have to. However, as we've learned with Iran over the years, it is not a good faith actor when it comes to its nuclear program. One must not forget that Iran was a member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which it violated in escalating its uranium enrichment levels to those as high as they were. One must also not forget that the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, which the United States left several years ago, even though the United States left that agreement, there were still other countries to whom Iran had binding obligations to not enrich, and yet Iran still enriched. It violated international law in multiple ways, and on top of that, it ultimately was found to be in breach of a non-proliferation condition with the IAEA, which passed a resolution against Iran upon finding out that Iran ultimately had conducted nuclear implosion tests and had enriched to levels as high as 60%, and also had undeclared sites where there were uranium residues found. So it's very clear that Iran in recent weeks, even during the negotiation stages with the 2 weeks the 60 days before the US decided ultimately before Israel attacked and then later on the United States, it's clear that Iran, time and time again, has been using every good faith opportunity that the West has given it to enrich its uranium stockpiles to a level well beyond what is needed for a civilian nuclear energy program. Simply put, for a nuclear energy program, one simply needs uranium that is enriched to approximately 3 to 3.67%. The fact that Iran has enriched it to approximately 60% is simply unexcusable. It's clear what their intent is. And as Dmitry Medvedev has noted recently, what's now out in the clear is that Iran ultimately did have a nuclear program designed for weapons, and it can continue to try to produce them.
Yes, Jordan, I do want to look at the final comment I made in my read section there. The IAEA stating that there was no clear sign of weaponization. Do you think that the trigger was pulled too early while diplomacy was still ongoing when Israel decided to launch their large-scale attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities? Do you think that stopped any possibility of diplomacy? And of course, that will now have an impact on Iran's willingness to engage in conversations, because they say they were already doing so, and that was taken out of their hands when their military and nuclear facilities were attacked on such a large scale.
If I properly recall, the IAEA ultimately passed a resolution against Iran, and that was passed simply a day or 2 days before Israel ultimately attacked. That resolution was designed to ultimately raise awareness to the breach and violations in regards to its nuclear enrichment of its non-nuclear enrichment obligations. To pretend that Iran has been diplomatic throughout this whole process is simply, in my opinion, a flawed way of looking at this, because Iran, throughout the past many decades now, has been sponsoring proxy groups to do its dirty work throughout the Middle East. It's been funding terrorist groups, whether it be Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, whether it be the Houthis in Yemen, whether it be Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq. What Iran has ultimately done is it has outsourced its bad faith duties to other terrorist groups to ultimately sabotage peace deals throughout the Middle East, to ultimately handcuff countries and their economies, to cause them to stumble, to allow Iran to progress towards a nuclear weapon without interference from some of the more powerful countries throughout the Middle East, such as Israel, which has had its hands tied now for years to deal with the Iranian threat head on.
Yes, and Jordan, finally, as we bring an end to this discussion, I of course want to look at the bigger picture as we look towards potential discussions. That's how we opened this section. Iran saying that there need to be certain sticking points that they are looking at, including a continued uranium enrichment program. Is this all coming about because Donald Trump took the decision to pull the United States out of that agreement of 2015? And what responsibility do you think that the US have as a result, given that this deal, as we know, took years to come together? It took contributions from the EU, Russia, China, the UK, France, the US, Iran, many nations coming together to get this deal done. It's not realistic, surely, to think that a deal was going to get done with Steve Witkoff, who ultimately isn't a diplomat, in a 60-day period. Is this a blunder from the United States? And do you think that more time needs to be given to make sure that this deal is lasting and can actually be productive in stopping potential nuclear weapons, something that Western leaders have all been in unity over?
You mentioned, it's a good question you ask, and you mentioned something very important, which is there are many countries also part and parcel of the JCPOA agreement that were not the United States. And according to international law, Iran owed all those other countries a duty not to enrich. The JCPOA non-nuclear, the JCPOA nuclear deal was binding upon Iran to all those other countries not to enrich, not to progress towards a nuclear weapon, which it did. In addition to that, the fact that Iran has been progressing towards a nuclear weapon even well before Trump ultimately removed the United States from the JCPOA was a clear indicator Iran was acting in bad faith, as well as the fact that Iran ultimately progressed towards a nuclear weapon, at least in terms of developing its infrastructure, well after Iran also had signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Time and time again, it has violated agreements. It has violated agreements that it still owes to other countries throughout the world. And it's to no coincidence that as early as tomorrow, possibly, we might see several European countries, including the US, the UK, Germany, and France, applying to have those snapback sanctions reapplied to Iran. So we will see what happens, but it seems to be becoming clearer to other Western countries and not just the United States that Iran clearly is not acting in good faith. And additionally, I'd just like to add that Iran has added another condition to engaging in negotiations, which is a pledge from the United States that it will not attack in the future. And that simply is a condition Iran knows that the United States will not agree with, because if Iran ultimately does advance towards a nuclear weapon once again, the United States will have no other option but to attack a regime that has funded millions upon millions, even billions of dollars to terrorist orgs and has committed to the destruction of one of the Middle East's only democracies.
Jordan, thank you ever so much for your